Are you looking for inspiration on a daily basis? Then check out Deal to Heal Teas. With our inspirational teas, you're sure to find something to inspire you. That's dealtohealteas.com. Put some inspiration in your situation. Wear inspirational tea and be inspired all day. Let's go to dealtohealteas.com. Again, that's dealtohealteas.com. Hey guys, if you're enjoying this podcast, then I know you enjoy the Girl Dad Discussion podcast. I'm your host, Ernest James, and I believe the relationship between a daughter and her father is one of the most important relationships a young lady can have. And therefore, my mission is to promote the daddy-daughter relationship by sharing the voices of girl dads to the world. So check out our podcast on every platform where podcasts can be listened to. And if you want to watch the podcast, check us out on our YouTube channel. Again, that's the Girl Dad Discussions podcast with your host, Ernest James. Welcome to Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. On this podcast, my guest and I will discuss topics and ways to help us to heal in every area of our lives. I believe that everyone can live a life that is happy, healthy, and whole. So I'm on a mission to help people to deal, heal, and fulfill. Deal with your problem, heal from the pain, and fulfill your purpose. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get to it. Welcome to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. I am your host, Ernest James, and I believe that everyone can and should live a life that is whole, healed, and healthy. And therefore, I'm on a mission to help people to deal, heal, and fulfill, to deal with your problems, to heal from the pain, and to fulfill your purpose. Thank you guys once again for tuning in to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. If you haven't already, make sure that you listen, like, subscribe, and share our podcast on all of your social media platforms and all your podcast listening platforms. And also check out our new YouTube channel. We have officially crossed over, right? So we changed the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast channel to the Deal to Heal podcasting network, because now you can find the Deal to Heal podcast on that channel, as well as our sister podcast, which is the Girl Dad Discussions podcast. And we also have two other podcasts in production right now and some more to come. So we have changed it to the Deal to Heal podcasting network on YouTube. So make sure you guys go there and subscribe. And again, check out our partner podcast, the Girl Dad Discussions podcast with E. James, on our YouTube channel and on all of your other podcast listening platforms. Also, I'm going to tell you guys how you can win $100 from the podcast, but you got to stay until the end of the episode in order to get that information. So next thing we want to talk about is our product of the week. As you guys know, we are a self-sustained podcast, and the way that we pay our bills and do what we need to do is by bringing you guys amazing products for you to buy. That way we can keep our bills paid. So our product of the week, we actually have two this week, which is our purpose journal, as well as our purpose planner, our purpose journal and our purpose planner, to help you create the purpose in your life that you need and also keep track of it, right? And so that can be found on Amazon. Actually, the link will be in the descriptions below. So make sure you guys go there. Also, you can go to our main page, which is the dealhealfulfill.org page, and our page for our inspirational teas and our ebooks, which we'll get into a little bit later and give you the information for those. So, so let's jump right in it. Today, just like any other day, we are blessed with the guest, Miss Drea. How you doing?
I'm good. How about you?
I am well. First of all, let me say thank you for being here because you could have been doing anything else with anyone else, but you're here with me and my listeners, and we definitely appreciate it. So do me a favor, Drea. We're gonna jump right in it. Do me a favor, introduce yourself to my listeners. Tell us who you are and a little bit about what you do.
I don't know why this question is always like shocking when someone. Well, I'm Drea. I'm a mother of two boys. I also have a daughter from another mother and father. Um, I'm the founder of Glass Houses and Paper Mache Lives. I'm also the author of a devotional journal called Undressing. I'm a champion for the broken beautifully. That's also another part of my brand that I've dedicated to women when they go through trials and troubles, that they really use that time to allow themselves to be transformed and come out better. Um, I'm also a recipient of God's grace. He's been walking with me well before I intentionally started walking with him. And I'm also one of the many people out here trying to normalize vulnerability and encouraging people to find their true selves and find freedom in the truth. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
me.
that's good. That's good. I definitely am a champion of vulnerability. I'm an open book pretty much on
Mm-hmm.
here. Talk about. I try not to talk about stuff that's, or I try not to talk about too much of other people's stuff
Mm-hmm.
who may be connected to me. But as far as me, I just tell everything. So, so I'm very vulnerable. I talk about the things that I've been through as far as depression and suicidal ideations and all those things that my listeners have heard my story plenty of times. So I'm very big on vulnerability because
Yeah,
I think when you're vulnerable, it gives the person you're talking to permission to be vulnerable also.
absolutely.
And especially as men in the men circle, that's a big thing because we always trying to save face amongst each other. But when we're able to put down our guards and say, look, this is what I dealt with and this
Yeah.
is what I'm dealing with, then it gives the other person permission to share as well. And a lot of times that's just what we need. You
Yeah.
know, we need to get some things off our chest. But enough about me. We're not going to get out about me. So, Drea, I always believe that, and I say this every time that I have my guests on and who are doing amazing things, right? And I always say there's always a story before the story.
Mm.
There's always a story and a turning point that changed your life that just from, okay, this is what happened to me. And once I get through that, how am I going to now change that and use it to help other people? And so, who is Drea at your earliest, that you can remember, and what was that initial incident, should I say, that kind of changed your life? And then after you got through it, was like, all right, now I'm going to use this story to help other people.
Man, I think there's a lot of different points in which, something, the Lord has done something with my broken place. But if you ask me who I was, it depends on, again, what stage in my life. When I
Mhm.
was much, much younger, I was a very quiet, tender hearted, like no confrontation, probably a good candidate for being bullied, actually. Like, if you want my lunch
Mhm.
here, just take the lunch
Yeah.
and go. Like, I was a very deep feeling child, and I just didn't like a lot of chaos, and I didn't like a lot of conflict. However, I think as I kind of went through life a little bit more, and especially I think this was um, definitely because of the parent child relationship that I experienced, I grew to be a little bit more hardened and
Mhm.
probably became a little bit combative. I walked with a lot of hurt feelings, a lot of offense. Um, there was a time in my life when I would fight a lot, actually. One might not believe it, but I would fight a lot. And that was just because I just did not have the right way to communicate what I was struggling with at home and with my parents and whatnot.
Yeah. And then so let's talk about that a little bit because um, one of the things that I do, of course, I got the Girl Dad Discussions
Hmm.
podcast, right? And so I wrote an ebook called the Four Core, which is the four core values that every daughter should receive from her father. And
Mm.
so the statement that you just made just hit a couple things that kind of triggered me a little bit. And one of the things you said was not being able to, I guess, express yourself the way that you should, because it wasn't coming from the home, it wasn't necessarily that way. And so
Yeah.
one of the things that I talk about in that uh, ebook, when we dealing with protection, which is one of the core values that I believe every daughter should get from her father, but I changed the word from protection to safety. And one of
Mm,
the main things that I speak on when I'm talking about that safety is creating a safe space for your child to be able to express who she is, and stand in her truth as far as being who she is, being able to voice her own opinion, being able to speak up for herself and advocate on behalf of herself, in whatever situation. But I
right.
know that that starts at home, especially with our daughters. As a father, I think that's mainly our job to really mold them. Of course, the mom does too, but I think it's kind of the opposite. Like you have the girl dads, and then you have the boy moms, right?
Yeah.
Because that's
Yeah.
kind of how it works, I guess. I don't know. That's I think that's how God set it up.
Yeah.
Where the father is like the one who's molding and really putting that those things into place. So you mentioned about not necessarily having that in your own household. How did that really affect you? And how did you even kind of find your voice? I know it probably was down the line a little bit,
Mm,
but
very much on the line.
how did that kind of play out in your story?
Yeah, I think again, anytime we are looking at who we were or how we were, I think the most important place to first look is at our childhood. I don't know if you can think of a
Mhm.
more important place,
Yeah.
but I struggle to. And for me, I would say there was very, very different expectations of me for my father and for my mother. So if I start with my father, for whatever reason, when I was born and I was young, I had something inherently in me that desired to love him and that just had this expectation to receive love and to receive protection from him. No, he didn't give me a reason to expect that,
Mm.
but there was something inherently in me that expected that. So, and sometimes I question, like when I go down the line here on the story, sometimes I question God to say, how would you allow me to love a person so much that could not reciprocate that? But nonetheless, I think even at a point, I favored my dad over my mother. And this was when I was very young and naive and whatnot. And if there were anything to go down between my parents, guaranteed in my head, it's my mom's fault. Like there was just this deep
Mm.
love I had for him. And it's unfortunate because he couldn't reciprocate that. My father was a very complicated man. He was a very hard man. He was a very, he's a very smart man, but he was very unkind with his words. And he was not very giving with his heart, and he was not very giving with his finances. And I say none of this to dishonor my father. This is just what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And when he was here, when he was alive, he would admit he was not the greatest dad, and that's okay. But again, there was something in me that just I had this expectation. Where did that come from? I don't know. But he found it very difficult to reciprocate love, and he was very, very impactful to how I perceived myself in terms of, how worthy I felt I was, how smart I felt I was. I didn't think I was smart. I didn't think I was deserving. I didn't think I was capable of doing very much. I didn't think I was cute. He was very focused on like weight and things like that. And so if you put on the least little bit of weight, he's going to be the first one to tell you, oh, you're getting fat. And it was a very destructive relationship. And to experience that from a very young age coming up, who else, if your father's saying these things about you, and if your father believes these things about you to be true, why wouldn't you believe it? He's your dad, right? So
Yeah.
I struggled with that for a very, very, very long time. Um, I think where my mom was concerned, I had kind of, because my father didn't live with us after like the age of 7, I think I had different expectations. I just expected her to cook and to make sure there's a shelter overhead, clothing, and all that. But I also did expect her to nurture. I did expect that and to be fair. And again, the nurturing side, because at one time I was very, very tender, I was very soft. So I needed her to kind of nurture that side of me. But my mom, unfortunately, for her own reasons, she was also very hardened. She was, a little hot tempered. Um, Definitely rough around the edges, and she wasn't all that fair when it came to like my sister and I. So that generated its own set of issues because there was, favoritism and sibling rivalry that, we were robbed, my sister and I, of many good years of like what should have been sibling goodness, right? But she had her own, my mom had her own challenges.
Hmm.
I've come to understand that more today. And I say none of this to dishonor her either. It just was.
Yeah.
So with all of this, I didn't have, I had a lot of gaps because you might think, what you're not getting from dad, maybe mom can buffer some of that a little bit, but I didn't have that. So what I had was a very distorted lens of who I was. What I had was a lot of hurt feelings and carrying around a lot of offense and a lot of anger. And so I moved through life looking through that distorted lens, and I moved through life with a lot of anger sitting on my chest, right? And I
Mhm.
made a lot of bad decisions as a result of that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and you know what? So I'm listening to you, and it's crazy because I don't know. I don't think you bought the my ebook, but
I didn't know about it until now.
but it is. I'm listening to you when you're describing your relationship with your father, right? And so you mentioned several things. You mentioned him talking about your weight and not being loving, not necessarily protecting you, and as you're talking, I'm listening. I'm like, man, those are the values that you're supposed to get from your father.
Yes.
So in my ebook, the four values is affirmations, love
Hmm.
and affection,
Hmm.
protection, and guidance. Those are
Yeah.
the four main values. And I'm listening to you talk, and I'm like, yeah, that's what you're supposed to get from your father.
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned about not even knowing why you loved him so much, but
Hmm.
I think that's kind of inherent with
It
with
is.
our daughters. I just think we're there. Like I said, I think it's that cross. I think that's the way God kind of made us to have that cross, that cross love for each other. So it's
Hmm.
like our daughters glean for their father's attention, and the sons kind of glean for the mom's attention. And I think God purposely did that for His own reasons.
Hmm.
Um, and so yeah, so we raise our kids, or should raise our kids, with a sense of guidance, a sense of love, a sense of affection, and protection. Especially for our daughters as fathers. And I don't know if you know my whole story about even how I got into podcasting. Um, Going through my journey, I'll make it real quick. Going through my journey, I came to a part of my life where um, I realized that every woman I had ever dated was a fatherless daughter. And so realizing that, I said, well, let me see how I can help this community. And so I started a page on Instagram called Friends to Fatherless Daughters, and just giving my opinion as a father. For one, I have one biological child, which is my daughter. She's going to be 21 now. And as a friend to fatherless daughters, and also as a brother, because I have five sisters. So watching
Hmm.
my dad raise my sisters. And so I started this um, Instagram page called Friends to Fatherless Daughters, and just giving my opinion, from a father and from a man on some of the issues that fatherless daughters face, and was asked to be on podcasts and things like that. So that kind of started my whole podcast journey, right? Um, but in that, going through that journey is when I wrote the ebook, the core four. And it just amazing because we were talking, and you just kind of like talked about everything that you're supposed to get. You know what I
Wow.
mean?
It saddens me because there will be times when I actually try to truly, I dig very deep to try to reflect back and think of, let me just find something good that dad taught me.
Mm,
I struggle. Like the things that I kind of walked away with was, don't ask men for anything because if I were to ask him for something, honestly, I'd be on pins and needles because I know the response was not going to be a gentle
mm,
and loving, kind one. You know what I mean?
right.
Don't ask men for anything. I learned, to be very, almost become a bit of a perfectionist because he's so critical. So I still carry a bit of that today. Like if I'm working on anything, I will literally, there should be like an 80-20 rule. I'm looking to make sure like 100%. And I've had to let go of that a little bit. But he's taught me to be very critical, not only of myself, but like of others and the things I'm doing and whatnot. He's taught me, not to really strive for too much because I'm not capable of too much. He's taught me a lot of things that you really just don't want to be, you don't want to be taught.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I could probably run through a lot of lists, but what I wish I could find is just like, I just want to have a good memory of something that he sat down and said, daughter, you should handle your finances this way, or something constructive. And I cannot, God forgive me if I'm missing it, but I can't find it. I reflect on this often.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, it's no disrespect to your father or your mom, in that case. Because I know, I remember, I'm sure you know who E.T., the hip hop preacher, is, Eric Thomas. Maybe heard of him. And so in his book, um, UOU, I think it's the UOU book, he talks about when he was writing the book, getting to a chapter where he was kind of conflicted about some things that happened because the people who did those things, it's like he was still connected to them and he still cared about them. And so he was kind of conflicted about, man, I don't know if I should tell this story. Yeah. And so one of his advisors was like, well, did it happen? And he said, yeah. He said, what's the truth? He said, yeah. He said, well, you should feel comfortable in telling it because when we talk about even Joseph, the story of Joseph, you can't tell the story of Joseph without talking about his brothers, right? Because that's how it all starts. You know what I mean? Yeah. It all starts with it. And actually, you can even go back farther and say it all started with his father, right? Showing favoritism and all of that to him, which kind of made the gap between his brothers, So, but if we're afraid to tell those parts, it leaves out a huge part of the story. And it's no disrespect to any of them if it's the truth, because the truth is just the truth. And so one of the things that I heard you mention was about decision making, and how I think even your upbringing kind of reflected your decision making. And so in the book, the Core Four, I talk about guidance, and that's one of the things that I definitely believe that as a father, we're supposed to give our daughters, right? Teach them how to make wise decisions and also to make decisions out of facts and not feelings, right? To be able to separate, okay, this is how I feel about this, but let me separate my feelings from it to be able to look at the facts of it and make those kind of decisions. And not only that, but I also believe that it's our job to teach our daughters how to make the best decisions, right? So it's not always good and bad, because it might be a good decision, but it might be something that's better. So I always give the example of my daughter when she came to me and she said, Dad, I want to buy my first car. So I'm saving up my money, and I want to have this big down payment. So my notes don't be that high, which is a good decision. That was very good. But as a father, I have to say, well, what's the best decision? And so I'm like, well, how about we work on your credit, make sure you got perfect credit so you can keep your money in your pocket and just sign your name and drive out. You know what I mean? And so it's those little things that, along that way of guiding our daughters into making those decisions and how to separate, the good from bad, So in your case, you mentioned about, having trouble even making those decisions. So how did that kind of work out, with the decisions that you made, and how did you kind of bounce back from that space of let me figure out how to make these wise decisions after making whatever mistakes that we all have
the
made.
Grace of God. Because I made several not so sensible decisions. And what I can also say about myself is, and I've recognized it more and more as I've grown, I've allowed myself to grow closer to God. He's never been far from me. I've been far from him. I understand how he speaks to me now. He's always spoken to me. But back then, I would always doubt. So even if I felt something in my spiritual gut, like, yeah, no. I would just I could be easily swayed to just kind of be influenced by what I'm seeing
Mhm.
even though what I'm seeing is ridiculous, and I know God is telling me something else. I'm like, no. Like I never received guidance on making decisions. It took a lot of life experiences and a lot of breaking to get me to where I am today. That's
Yeah.
the honest truth. I can never say there was like a mentor that was in my life, or a particular counselor or something like that. It literally was a bunch of life experience. Um, the conversation that you were describing with your daughter about buying a car, I've never experienced that. I guarantee you, as you described the conversation, I'm thinking to myself, if I went to my dad and said, "So, Dad, I'm thinking of buying a car," his first thing is to be like, "So, what are you telling me for? You think I'm gonna help you pay for it?" Like that would be the response I would expect. So when you're
Right.
describing that, I'm like, "Oh, that's so nice." Like anytime I'm around or I hear about a good father-daughter story, or when I'm around people who have good fathers and I see that interaction, it's odd, but it makes me feel uncomfortable
Mhm.
because I so adore it. And I'm like, wow, I wish I had that. But something in me feels like I should be like leaving the room. Like it's like it's
Yeah.
almost foreign to me, although I would have loved to experience it. If I don't know if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I do exactly,
Yeah.
because it's like it's not your experience, so it's
No.
kind of like you're not a part of the club, sort of.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so
So
it's
you're
like,
just
all
like, should
right,
I
so
just
maybe,
leave
yeah,
like
this
the room?
this is where
But
I get off at, you know.
yeah. But yeah, like there was no the breaking moments. Like I said, I had several before I really, and each time I had a breaking moment, and God faithfully, produced something that I can learn from it.
Mhm.
I got a little bit better. Now I think I'm closer to being, where I want to be, um, than ever before, and that's just from my last breaking, which was actually marrying someone that my father said absolutely, like he couldn't. He's like, if you marry that man, I'm cutting you out of my will. Like he was so adamant that that's not the one. But I did it because the person that I chose to have, my children with, he was so similar to my dad. Like that was my
Mhm.
longest relationship ever. And I ended up picking someone very similar to my
Right.
dad. And it like at the time you don't recognize exactly why you're doing it. But later on I recognized, because I actually wanted my dad's approval. I'm thinking this is someone he'll be like, yeah, girl, like
Yeah.
you've done something right. But the truth is the relationship was not good. And in fact, my children's father has his own, I'm sure, challenges from his childhood. And I think it was like putting two broken
Mhm.
people together. And back when you're young, you don't realize what a disaster that is until you start going through it. But even in
Right.
going through it, I knew I didn't enjoy the relationship, but it still felt somewhat normal to me because the way
Right.
my mother and father interacted. So you're just like, you're just going to go through it. I'm having these children with this person. I'm going to stay here forever. I don't care.
Yeah.
But God delivered me from that situation, and he gave me two beautiful sons. And when I left that situation, and the Lord gave me the permission to do it. It's a long story, but he gave me the clearance to do it. And when he did, my life started moving along very smoothly. Although, that person did try to create a lot of havoc in my life in my departing, but
Mhm.
nonetheless, the Lord truly brought me through it. So I said, great. But now, um, I met a person, or I had met a person at that time that was to the complete opposite. He was
Mhm.
not super ambitious. He was not the corporate guy. He was not anyone my father would be like, yeah, this is a smart guy. This is a decent guy. I like this guy. I can get behind this guy. Completely different. He was very quiet. I'm not going to say he was not the most articulate. He was not, there was many things that he was not, but he was seemingly very, very nice. And that niceness was also backed by his sisters, which I knew. So I thought, you know what? I've gone the other way, the
Right.
smart, the corporate, the this and that, and the other. Maybe sometimes you just got to get behind someone who maybe doesn't have all these other things and the finances and whatever, but they have a good heart. So maybe they just need a good person backing them. And
Mhm.
what more can you ask for?
Right.
But so that choice was made to kind of get completely to the other end of, what I had experienced before and what my dad was like.
Mhm.
And that probably turned out to be an even bigger disaster in the
Mhm.
end. And I was very adamant when my dad said, you know, if you marry this person, I'm cutting you out. He even told me, if you don't get a prenup, I'm cutting you out. And I was like, I'm not getting a prenup. Nope, I'm not doing none of that because I believe in this. And I didn't even want to hear what my father had to say, but he ended up being right,
Right.
which was so sad. It was so sad, but he ended up being right. So again, like a lot of my decisions, and I recognize it later on, you know, I was coming from a very, like looking through a very distorted lens. Although the lens was getting clearer and clearer as I go through each phase in my
Mhm.
life, it was still a little bit foggy. What's the word? Foggy
Okay. Yeah, that's
back
it.
then. All right.
Yeah.
So it's clearer now.
Yeah, yeah. So speaking of clear, right? So I'm listening to your story, and you're talking to using the acronyms of being broken a lot, and taking that broken and then talking about things getting clearer.
Hmm.
I want to talk about your organization, Glass Houses and Paper Mache Lives.
Hmm.
So it seems like it fits right in there with the clear lenses and the broken. You know what I mean? So now we have this glass house. So tell us a little bit about that.
So glass houses for me is, again, of course, glass being something that is easy to shatter, but it is also about transparency.
Yeah.
So with me, I'm very transparent, which is very odd for someone like me because I was not raised to be very vocal. I was not raised to be, transparent and talk your business out in the streets and things
Mhm.
like that. So this is a very strange space for me. So the glass kind of represents, again, that, ability to shatter, also the transparency. The house is just representative of us, our lives. And then the paper mache is, and I don't know if you're familiar with paper mache, but paper in itself, like you tear it easy.
Right.
But paper mache, when you take paste and you start kind of forming this thing, it makes it a little bit more sturdy, a little bit hard.
Hmm.
That to me is the other aspect of life where instead of just dealing with things, dealing with our fragility, dealing with our truth, we just try and find things to kind of wrap it up in
Hmm.
and strengthen it with. But it's really not all that strong because inside we're still just that fragile piece of paper.
Right.
So that's where glass houses and paper mache lives came from.
So what do you actually do with that movement? Um, because I know I definitely want to get into talking about your devotion